Thanks, Sam. Hey, if I don't get over to your place by 7:30 Friday morning, go ahead and start without me. I'll be along shortly. Beautiful day, isn't it? So I thought summer would last a little bit longer, but hopefully we'll get a reprieve from this and get back to some warm weather. But I appreciate you asking me out tonight. It was kind of interesting that I think it was Virginia that kind of got me into this spot of having to do this thing tonight. And, you know, I've been here for quite a few years now, and I've never really paid a whole lot of attention to the history of the team. So when it came to putting this together for tonight, I had to do some research. And in fact, it was very interesting. So it was kind of fun to do. So I appreciate that opportunity. Go ahead. If you got questions as we go ahead. I'll try not to bore you too much. So if we go back to the beginning, it all started with the construction of the War Memorial back in 1955. And no, I was not here for the start. There was a couple of very well-known old-time hockey people that sort of ended up being the ones that put this franchise in place here. And one was Frank Selke of the Montreal Canadiens, and the other Conn Smythe of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Unless you're a hockey person, you probably don't know those names, but they were very well-known hockey people back when it was the original 6 National Hockey League teams. And they got together with local owners Sam Toth and Ed House. They had promised to put a franchise here, and they did put a franchise here, and which was named the Rochester Americans. Now, I've heard a few different stories as to why it is the Rochester Americans, but I think the one that seems to hold the most water is that because it was Montreal Canadiens, and they named it the Rochester Americans. So I kind of, at least that's what I tell everybody, that's the reason why the Rochester Americans. First game was played in 1956. On October 15th against the Cleveland Barons, and ended in a 2-goal tie. So we look at the 1950s, and the origination was affiliated with Montreal and Toronto, supplying the players here to Rochester. And 1956, coach was Billy Ray, had 73 points in 64 games and went to the league finals, but did lose to, once again, Cleveland. In 1959, they again went to the finals, lost to the Buffalo Bisons. So in the first 4 years, the Amerks lost twice in the finals and once in the first round, and did not qualify at one time. So actually, in the first 4 years, it was a pretty good start. In 1959, Toronto bought out Montreal, taking controlling interest, and then took over 98% of the stock in 1964. Is that doing that?
Yeah, it's kind of
Quit that. Stop it. All right, one of the 1960s, one of the most successful decades in the history of the team. It was they won 3 Calder Cups, 1965 to 1968. And they actually started out the 60s by losing in the finals in 60, and then only to getting to round 1 the next 4 straight years. So not a great start to the 60s. The 60-61 season, Montreal was not happy with the joint dealing with Toronto. They kind of figured that one team was playing their prospects more than the others. So Montreal moved out, and they moved their affiliation to Quebec. And so Toronto had the team on its own in the next 2 years. Then Coach Joe Crozier came along, and the Amerks winning their only back-to-back championships, 1965 and 66. And we got this gentleman back here. Hold that stick up. He has a stick from the 1965 championship, which was Les Duff's stick. So that's great. Thank you much for bringing that up. Then the next season, they did lose in the finals, but again won the Calder Cup in 1968. So under Joe Crozier, what a great run that was. And the Amerks became the only team to make it to the finals in 4 straight seasons. In 1966, the Leafs sold the team to a group led by Punch Imlach, another very famous hockey person from years ago, and who then 2 years later sold it to the Vancouver Canucks of the Western Hockey League. And Vancouver soon joined the NHL, the National Hockey League, but still kept the affiliation with the Amerks, which led to some pretty lean years. And I hate to say that because I'm from Vancouver. So they didn't do a very good job with the team here. Anyway, to the 1970s, which was really a down decade, they missed the playoffs the first 4 years and finished last in the league for 4 straight years. In 1972, Vancouver sold the team to local ownership group. Once again, Sam Toth, along with Rick Altier and Joe Fox, and they named Don Cherry as the coach and general manager. And the team had no affiliation for the next 2 years. They were an independent team without getting supplied by the National Hockey League. 1974, they won the regular season title, but lost in the first round to New Haven. The Boston Bruins hired Cherry as their coach in 1974, and which at that same time, the Bruins actually became the parent club of the Amerks. So the Amerks made the playoffs the next 4 years and lost to Nova Scotia in the finals in 1977. There's lots of losses in the finals, man. 1979, the Sabres, owned by Seymour and Nordy Knox, bought the Amerks and they became the parent club, which is the Buffalo Sabres, where they first came on board. Then the 1980s, another successful on-ice decade with 2 Calder Cup championships, one in 83 and one in 87. Mike Keenan was the coach for the one in 83, beating the Maine Mariners in 4 straight games. In 87, John Van Boxmeer was the coach, and the Amerks won the regular season championship on the last night of the regular season, beating Binghamton in a shootout, and then went on to beat Sherbrooke in Game 7 of the finals. That was my first year here, and I went through all of those great times in the 86-87 season. Also of note, in the 80s, the Amerks Hall of Fame was established in 86, 30th season of the franchise, and since then, they have 68 members to the Hall of Fame. Looking at the 1990s, a lot of changes in the early 90s. John Regas took over the Sabres ownership, and the local owner, Steve Donner, bought the team. And Steve, from Rochester, wanted to make sure that the team stayed here in Rochester, so he got on board and actually purchased the team from Regas, who ended up in jail later on. You know, he was a crook. The affiliation with the Sabres continued, and it did become the longest NHL-AHL affiliation in history. It was a very strong decade in the 90s, and on the downside, the Amerks did lose 4 straight seasons in the finals from 90 to 93, but on the upside, made the playoffs in all 10 seasons, going to the finals 5 times out of those 10 years. Did have 1 Calder Cup championship, and that was in 1996, beating the Maine Mariners again, coached by John Tortorella. The team was coached, the Amerks, coached by John Tortorella, who is still coaching in the National Hockey League, currently with the Philadelphia Flyers. He's been with most teams in the NHL. Up to the 2000s, we're moving along pretty quick here. Started off the decade with a trip to the finals, but again lost. And that was the only time they went that far in the 2000 decade. They were coached by Randy Cunnyworth in the 04-05 season, had the best season in the history of the franchise with 112 points in the season, but lost out in the second round of the playoffs, which I reminded of Randy at the golf tournament this morning. He says, "Oh, did we do that well?" I said, "You didn't know how good you were." So things went downhill, unfortunately, from there, missing the playoffs 3 of the next 4 years. In 2005, the Sabres and Florida Panthers agreed to dual affiliation, which was a total disaster. In 2008, the Sabres weren't happy with the situation, so they moved their affiliation out of Rochester and went to Portland, Maine, ending the 29-year working agreement. So that was the 2000s. And the Amerks running into a whole bunch of financial problems. At the time in the late 90s and the early 2000s, Steve Donner, with a couple of partners, they wanted to go big time for Rochester. At one point, we had the Amerks, the Nighthawks lacrosse, we had the Rhinos soccer team, we had the 4-rink complex at MCC, we had the soccer stadium, Paytech Park. There was girls soccer. Anyway, there was a whole lot of things going on at the same time, and pretty much most of them were losing money. So got into financial problems, and Steve Donner, to avoid bankruptcy, ended up having to sell the team. So here's some of the parts that not everybody knows about, so don't tell anybody. The Amerks were up for sale, the Nighthawks up for sale, the Rhinos were taken back by the Adirondack Bank along with Paytack Park because we didn't pay them the money that they needed, so they took over the team. The Amerks lost the four-rink complex at MCC, and Donner trying to sell the team. There was word that Tom Golisano was coming in to buy the team, and he made it known that the team was going to be moved out of Rochester. In fact, we had been told as employees that we weren't going to have jobs the next year. So Steve Donner, not too happy with that, wanting to keep the franchise in Rochester, went sort of quietly behind the wall and went to Kurt Stiers. He lives in the First Nations reservation in Canada. Very wealthy young man in the tobacco business, and Kurt, who is really lacrosse. He wanted the lacrosse team, but not the hockey team. And Steve said, well, if you want the lacrosse team, you're going to take both. So Kurt Stiers ended up buying the hockey team, and the lacrosse team took over and started to right the ship. He began to pay off a lot of the bills that the Amerks hadn't paid. So it really started to turn things around a little bit at that point. But he still didn't want the hockey team. He wasn't a hockey person. He was strictly a lacrosse person. 2010s, probably the toughest on-ice year, never made it past the first round of the playoffs, didn't even qualify for the playoffs in 4 years. Stiers ended up selling the Amerks, but did keep the Nighthawks, and sold it at that time to Kim and Terry Pagula, who were the current owners of the team. That was in 2011, so they had already purchased the Sabres and wanted the affiliation away from Portland and much closer to home here in Rochester, so they ended up offering Kurt Stiers to buy the team, which they did, and thank goodness they did. Things have really improved since that point. The 2020s began with our fun year known as COVID. The season ending abruptly in 2020, and a shortened season in the 2021 season. But then, as I say, things started picking up, making the past the first round in the playoffs, and for the first time in 17 years. So it had been a long, dry spell. And so far in the 3 seasons since then, they've gone to round 2 twice and round 3 once. Things continue to look up with a lot of young, very talented players in the mix, and a lot of very high draft picks are here. In fact, last year, talking about young, we had 4 teenagers in the lineup at the start of last year, which is, you just about never had anybody under 20 prior to that. So a lot of very young talent, and the attendance has been picking up. There's been some great crowds packing the house, especially in the playoffs. It's been sellouts and a whole lot of fun to return to that. So the team is just about to begin the 69th season. A couple of other notes, bringing on board a new coach. Seth Appert has gone to Buffalo as the assistant coach, so Michael Leone has just been named the 35th coach in Amerks history, and he's the 14th coach I've had to train. And the Amerks are the second oldest team in the American Hockey League, Hershey being still the first, and they came on board in the 38-39 season. Yeah, but they're good.
Are we ever going to beat them?
Yeah, we've beaten them. I can't remember quite when, but no, they're a good team. They operate a little differently than we do. You have kind of two ways of looking at things in this National Hockey League, American Hockey League affiliation. One is to bring in a lot of young talent, give them all the playing times they can, so that they're ready to move on to the NHL and be great players, which is really working well here. The other is for the AHL team to have a very limited number of those prospects and bring in a whole bunch of veteran, very talented older players, and that's what Hershey does. Whereas the Rochester Americans, all their players are National Hockey League contract players with the Buffalo Sabres and young and talented, whereas Hershey has a lot of the veterans, and so they've won the championship the last 2 years. They're a good team. They're a real good team. We almost got them the last time we played, but anyway. Let's see. And again, I had mentioned the Hall of Fame established in '86 now with 68 members. So that in my research is what I came up with. I hope I didn't bore you too much here on what happened with the team. So I don't know what information you might be looking for, so I'm just going to open it up for questions as to what you might want to know about the Rochester Americans, or me, or whatever. Yes, sir.
You said it was they're the second oldest team, and Hershey was from in the 1930s. Who do they play?
Hershey?
Yeah.
Right next to the Reese's Cup factory, the chocolate factory. They're in Hershey, and they had an old building, which they moved out of about 6 or 7 years ago, and now they have the Giant Center, which is a beautiful building. It's right next to Hershey Park.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been to Hershey?
No.
Okay, well,
What I'm asking is, what teams do they play? If they are the oldest or the second oldest?
okay, so the way it works, it's not normal, right? It's not where we play every team in the league. The American Hockey League is spread from the East Coast all the way up to the West Coast. And we don't make the kind of money to pay the travel expenses that National Hockey League teams and other major leagues do. So what they do is there's two conferences, Eastern Conference, Western Conference. We play only against the Eastern Conference. We don't go out west unless it's to the playoffs to play in the Western Conference. So, and Hershey is in a different division. We're heavily weighted to play to our own division, the North Division, and Hershey is in the Atlantic Division. So they play a lot of the teams, most of their games are played against Lehigh Valley, Providence, Hartford, Charlotte, a lot of the teams in the East, whereas we're mostly playing games against the teams in our division, which is Syracuse, Utica, Toronto, Montreal, which is Laval, and Cleveland. That's pretty much our division, Belleville. So we do play Hershey, but we play them one time at their building and one time at our building in the season. So we all play. The schedule has been dropped from 82 to 76 games now, so we all play 76 games in the league, but we don't play each other, and it's not the even number of games. Yes?
Giant Center opened up in early 2000, somewhere around 2003.
2000 already?
Yeah.
2000. Oh, I love that building. It's a great building. So the Giant Center, that's in Hershey, yeah, and that one's right by. They're all right around by all of the different Hershey factories, and you drive into town and gain 12 pounds just breathing before you get off the bus. Did I cover all the issues? Nobody has any questions? Yes, sir.
How long do you plan on staying announcing?
You know what? I get that question so many times. I don't know anymore if that's a question or a request. I know, I'm just teasing you. I'm getting down near the end. This is my 55th year overall. It'll be my 39th in Rochester, and that's a lot of bus rides. So the travel has been sort of getting to me. I've had some health issues, but so we brought in a young man from Cincinnati. He had been the voice of the Cincinnati Cyclones, I think it is, for the last few years, and he came in last year and is starting to do some of the games, and we're sort of bringing him along to take over for me in the next couple. I know that I'll be here doing fewer road games this coming season. I'll try and do all the home games, but maybe half of the road games. And then next year I'll still do some. There's a big year coming up. The year after this one, it'll be my 40th. It'll be the team's 70th. So I think there's maybe some special things planned for that year. So I kind of like to be around for that, as long as they keep letting me on the bus anyway. So to answer your question, you still got to put up with me for a couple of years. Yes?
Go
ahead.
I'm not a hockey fan, but sometimes I see a certain amount on TV and all that. And what I want to know is, what is with all these fights? It seems like they're always settling things with a melee of some kind.
Well, you know what? I'm old school. She wants to know about why all the fights in hockey. Well, that's the way it used to be. It's not that way anymore. There's very few fights anymore. Darn. I kind of enjoyed a good scrap. But you know what? In some sports, the officials, they blow the whistle every time you turn around. There's another whistle. Whereas in hockey, it used to be the players sort of policed themselves. And there were a whole lot less whistles, and actually there was a whole lot less injuries back then than there is now. But because they wanted to be a family sport, the powers that be have really made it very tough on those people who do participate in a fight or whatever. But you know what? These guys are going 1,000 miles an hour for up and down the ice, back and forth, and you run into somebody and your tempers are going to flare. The thing is that I can only remember one time a person getting hurt in a fight, but lots of times getting checked into the corner legally, coming up with a shoulder or a knee injury or whatever. So, but anyway, that's just my opinion. But there's a whole lot less of it now than there used to be. That joke about I went to the fights and a hockey game broke out or something. Yeah, whatever that was. That belongs to baseball lately, I think. So that joke kind of went by the wayside.
I still miss John Quincy.
John Winsey. He was before my time, John Winsey. But I heard lots of great things. You know, I've been here for a little over half, and I've seen some great players here, outstanding, talented people. But I missed a whole bunch before I got here. There were some great players that were here before.
How about your career?
Well, like I said, this will be my 39th year here. Before that, it was all out west. I was born in Alberta, and then Vancouver, and it was 14, I think, when my parents moved to Denver. So I've been in the States since I was 15, which is about 10 years ago now. And went through high school there, and then got into broadcasting school, and went on from there. Started out in Grand Island, Nebraska, and was there for quite a few years. Learned just about everything about the business I could. I did just about all jobs in Grand Island. Then went on and went to Denver as a sports director at a station there, and then finally got into doing full-time play-by-play sports in Sioux City, Iowa, and the University of North Dakota at Grand Forks, North Dakota. And from there went to San Diego in the World Hockey Association. What a culture shock that was, going from North Dakota to San Diego. I remember I went and interviewed in San Diego, and North Dakota had played the game on Saturday night at Notre Dame in South Bend, and I got on the flight in Chicago that night, took the red eye to go to San Diego, and I've got big coat on and boots, and they opened up the door of the plane in San Diego. Back then, it was before they had the walkways. You had to go down the stairs and across the tarmac. But they opened the door, and I stepped out onto the top stairs and said, "I'm never going back." San Diego was unbelievable. I did go back for 2 days and to give my wife instructions on how to sell the house and stuff, and that was it. And I was gone back to San Diego. So, yeah. And then all over out west, with trying to remember all where Seattle, Portland, San Diego, Phoenix. I did baseball. There was Albuquerque. There was I said Phoenix, Denver, Salt Lake. So a lot of teams out west. A lot of different sports, mostly hockey along the way. So I was the only one that knew the hockey rules, being a Canuck.
How did you get here?
I was in Salt Lake City, and George Bergantz called, was the general manager of the team then, and he had talked to Neil Smith, who was the general manager in Adirondack, and Neil was trying to get me to go there, and I said, no, pass, no thanks. And so George asked him, who should I talk to? And Neil gave him my number, he called, and then I talked to one of my good friends who's still the voice in Nashville, Pete Weber, and talked to him, and he had done a lot of fill-in games here, and he says, if you get a chance, go there. And so I came here. So that's how it happened. That was 1986. Actually, you know what? Virginia and Ann should be doing this presentation. They know more about the history of the team than I do.
In your career, Rochester, do you have a favorite player that you really enjoy?
You know, I get asked that question all the time, and my answer is there are so many favorite players. I hate to say one or another because there's just so many of them. And actually, there's some that are favorites for different reasons. Some are favorites on the ice, some are favorites in person, some are favorites because I'm still friends with them. But I think of some of them were at the golf tournament today, like Randy Cunneyworth, for example. He's always one that has been great. Dan Frawley from years ago, and Steve Smith from a long time ago. Players that have done so well, like Ryan Miller, for example, and my mind's drawing blank. Can't think of all the names. Jason Pominville, and just so many players for some reason have really been my favorites. Yeah.
I've noticed that there's been a great decline in the abilities of the announcers across most sports, to the point that it's hard for me to listen to them. Have you noticed a similar kind of decline?
Well, am I included in that group?
No, you're not.
Oh. For those that didn't hear, he says there's a decline in broadcasters, play-by-play people especially, right?
Yeah.
Over the years. You know what? I have different philosophy as to this job than a lot of other people do, because I'm old school. I've been around for such a long time. To me, the job is to tell people what's going on out here. To be, especially if you're listening to radio, so that you know, you can picture what's going on the ice, which is what I try to do. I don't know if it's because there's so much TV now, every game's on TV and stuff, that the broadcasters figure, all right, you're seeing what's going on, so I'm going to tell other stories and do a lot of things, and which is what happens now. And it seems like most of them are trying to make a name for themselves rather than promoting what's going on in front of them. I feel my job is to sell tickets, because if people aren't in the stands, I'm not going to have a job. So I want you to first of all know the score. That's the biggest thing. And then I try and act as your TV. I want to paint the picture of what's going on out there. So that's what I try and do, which I feel that, yeah, is something that as the broadcasters of today have really gotten away from.
My wife gets upset with me because I'm often yelling at the TV, call the game, call the game.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I agree. They're not listening to me when I'm telling them a different story. I've been the new guy that we brought in here to take over for me. We've had some long discussions about that. I'm kind of winning him over a little bit, but some people that in the broadcasting industry are saying you got to tell more stories. You got to give the background of these players. No, you don't. You got to tell them what's going on out there, because the game's going on. If you want to do it in an intermission or a stoppage of play, great, do it then, but not when the game's going on. So anyway, I try, but I will admit that I'm not like I used to be either. I'm slowing up, let's say that. Trying to keep track of what's going on. So when you're yelling, don't yell at me, all right?
And what's your secret for remembering all the names from the numbers? You're seeing the numbers, and you've got to know the name, because you can't always see it, I know, because, you know, they're turned around or not.
My secret is you don't know if I got them right or not, do you? Now, takes about a half hour to go through before a game and memorize the names and the numbers. So that when I see a number, I say a name. If it's a team that I've seen quite a few times in the past, it takes maybe 15 minutes as a refresher. A team that I haven't seen before might take a half hour, 40 minutes to memorize. But you get to the point where some of them, if you see a team enough times, you recognize a player, the way they skate, the way they shoot, the ones that can't stand up on their skates, and the ones that are really fast. You kind of get to recognize some of them that way, and at some points it's guesswork.
When you have a foreign player, how do you talk to him before to get his name, the right way to pronounce it?
You know what? Before the first game, I go through the locker room from every stall. I go all the way around the locker room and ask them to pronounce their name for me. Some of them I still can't pronounce. I mean, you get a Czech player or a Russian or whatever, and it's so weird that my tongue will not wrap around those particular teeth that you need to in order to be able to say that name. So get as close as I can, but I always check with the player and ask them to say their name. Talking about the foreign players, I've been telling them in the office, you know what? We need to, excuse me, at the beginning of the games now, with all the players that we have here, we need to start playing the Swedish national anthem and maybe the Russian national anthem at the start of the games. So it's kind of fun having all of those Europeans and guys from elsewhere. I stumped you. Yes, sir.
How big's the structure of the staff that puts the team together to have a game or to travel out of town to a game? When people-
You know what? When I first came here, there was 4 of us traveling with the team. There was the coach, the equipment manager, the trainer Kent Weisbach, and myself. There was 4 of us. Now we've got traveling on the bus staff. There's 11 or 12. I always am teasing the people in the office that when I came here, we had 7 people in the office. And a manager, we had a receptionist, and a bookkeeper, and then everybody else did everything, you know, selling tickets, selling advertising, and doing all that. Now we've got 11 people in the ticket department, and we've got 3 people in the public relations department, and we've got 4 in the social media department, and we've got others that I have no clue what they do. So there's a whole lot more people, but the thing that I razz them about is that back here when we had 7 people, we had 5,500 average attendance. And now we're getting back to that, but not quite there yet. So we used to operate the War Memorial at 93% of capacity back in my first years. Of course, my first 14 years, we went to the finals 8 times, which is unheard of. It's just phenomenal. That's how good the teams were back then. Getting back there. Getting there.
What do they need to get better? What kind of, I mean, as I say, I know nothing about it, so you can help me to understand what does it take to get a team built up and going back to where they want to be.
Win. Yeah. You know, one thing that I think hurt the team was the expansion of the building. one reason that the team did so well back then was that we only had 7,300 available seats. And so 5,500 season ticket holders, if you wanted a ticket to a game, you better be a season ticket holder. Then the building was expanded to 11,000 or whatever, and we weren't doing that well, and there was no need for people to buy season tickets. They could just, okay, well, we're going to go to a game tonight. They'd go up, get in line, get a ticket, and go into the game. So whereas they were forced to go to pretty much all the home games, now they might be tired one day, say, well, I'm not going to go tonight, I'll go to the next game. So that really cut into our overall. But if we get back to the point where we're selling tickets and we started selling out the building and that, which is really helping. Our season tickets are going up and up. We get that up, I think it'll be good. It'll be getting back to where we were. But the other point too is that we'll be a lot higher than we used to be because we got a lot more space now than we had before. Yes, ma'am.
What does the average player get a year?
Average player what?
What does it make their salary?
Their
Oh,
salary.
money talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a huge range. To try and explain why, there's two kinds of contracts with players here. They're basically all National Hockey League contracts. So the players all belong to the Buffalo Sabres, except for we do have a few that are American Hockey League contracts because the NHL teams can only have 50 under contract, okay? So we'll get about 25 players here from Buffalo, of which 20 will be NHL contracts and 5 will be on the American League contracts. So now a player on the American League contract is going to make less than the National Hockey League player. And along with that, the NHL contracts are one-way contracts or two-way contracts. Actually, there are three-way contracts. But that meaning that a player on a one-way contract, no matter where he is, Buffalo, Rochester, or where are we at? Jacksonville, they're going to be paid NHL money if they're on a one-way contract. If they're playing in Buffalo, they get their NHL contract, but if the Sabres send them to Rochester and they're on a two-way contract, they're going to get an American Hockey League pay because that's a lower tier. So they're going to get less playing here and even less if they're in Jacksonville, our affiliate. So now to answer your question, did you get all that? Got all, okay. American Hockey League players will go anywhere from, I'm guessing at this, I don't know it for sure, but I'm guessing about 50 to 700 or 800 per year. The real good AHL players are making that much. NHL contracts, I'd say that they're probably in the range of, in the second tier, they're probably in the range of around 70,000. And the one-way players are making minimum of $1 million. We had 3 players last year on our team here in Rochester that were making $1 million. They were on one-way contracts with Buffalo. So, like I said, it's a wide range. All I know is they all make more than I do, you know. So. Yes, sir.
I got a question. When the playoffs come around, I guess I'm confused, but like I noticed with Hershey, the minute that Washington got knocked out of the playoffs, they dumped a whole bunch of players down into Hershey that were on the NHL team. But with the Sabres, when their season was done and the Hammers made it to the playoffs, I think they only had like one guy or something that came down from the team. And there was guys that were on the Amherst most of the season. They got called up, but they wouldn't let them come back down when the playoffs started. How does that like work for? How come like when the Sabres end their season, they can't just drop the players down to help them for the playoffs?
Yeah, I know, that burns my butt too.
Like I think it happened with like Hale Clay. He was in Rochester most of the year, then he got called up later on in the season. Then when the playoffs came, he wasn't eligible to come
Okay, for Cale Clegg, he's a veteran player. And he had been in the National Hockey League long enough that if they were going to try and send him to Rochester, he'd have to clear waivers. So they didn't want to lose him, so they didn't put him on the list. Now, there's a roster deadline, which is first part of March, maybe end of February, somewhere in there, that if you're going to try and send a player to the American Hockey League team, they've got to be put on our roster. And then be recalled to Buffalo. Okay, so it can be just a paper transaction all in a matter of an hour. But some of the players, like I say, in order to avoid that, would have to go on waivers and could be claimed by another team, and they don't want to lose that player. And not only that, if you have a young player, let's say J.J. Paterka, for example, who's just played, he's eligible to come back because it's only his, second or third year of his contract. He could come back. But he's played the whole season as a major leaguer and an NHLer, and they don't want to send him back because all of a sudden that's sending him the wrong message, that saying, okay, now you're a minor leaguer again. And they don't want to do that. And I understand that. It's kind of sucks for us, but I understand that. So that's some of the different reasons why players come back, whereas Hershey, for example, they get it set up where a lot of the players that go to Washington, like I say, they don't have that many players that are affiliated or are under NHL contract, but they set it up so they get those players on the roster and are able to send them back. Good question. Okay, we're going to have a test now on everything I talked about. Yeah, right. Now, I really appreciate the opportunity to come out and speak to you folks. It got me into, like I say, doing a little research, which was kind of fun to go back and figure out why this team exists and what helps it exist. So that was fun. And it was a lot warmer here than it was on the golf course today. Any other questions?
Yeah, what'd you shoot today?
Pardon me?
What'd you shoot in the game of golf today?
Actually, I didn't play.
Oh,
No, I was smart enough to hang out with Ann and Virginia.
Mary. Don't forget about Mary.
I haven't played since pre-COVID, so
If you can say, how are the Bagulas to work for?
best ownership I have ever worked for in my 55 years. Absolute best. They are great people. I feel so bad about Kim. What a beautiful person that she is. But it certainly looks like she's not going to be returning, unfortunately, with after a stroke, which really did her in. But Terry is you go over and you talk to him, it's like he's been your next door neighbor for 25 years. You know, just stand there, have a conversation with him, and such a warm individual, and I can't say enough good about the Bagulas. It's been the best I've ever worked for. Thank you so much. First game is October 11th. And I've got tickets here. If you want to buy tickets. No, I don't have tickets. They don't let me sell tickets. Thanks, Sue.
Okay, it's time for the 2020